Yes, Mr. Chair.
All right. Thank you all for joining us this evening. I'd like to jump right in. Um, this is the May 7th hearing for the Health Committee. I am Councilman Christopher Burnett, Chairman of the committee. Also on this call or Zoom, or sorry, WebEx broadcast, we are joined by Councilmember Clark, member of the committee. And I'm not seeing any other committee members just yet, but they'll probably be joining us soon. We also have representatives from the president's office, the mayor's office, multiple city agencies, and I believe we have someone from the Baltimore City Public School System as well. Before we start, I want to go through a few housekeeping items. I want to make sure that everyone remembers to mute yourself when you're not speaking. Also, be sure to identify yourself before you speak, for the record, so that we can document who's speaking into the minutes. Speak slowly and clearly, and after you're finished, please mute yourself again unless you're asked to speak. But just want to make sure we're doing that because this will be recorded and posted, so we want to make sure the quality is as good as it possibly can be for the public who are watching. We are meeting this evening to discuss Council Bill 20-0495, Pesticide Control and Regulation. And the purpose is regulating the use and application of pesticides in Baltimore City. I am not going to attempt to say all of the types of pesticides. I will leave that to the bill sponsor. I can never seem to get them right, enunciate them correctly. But the committee will want to note that the committee will not be voting out the bill today. We will use this hearing to hear from agency representatives and the general public. And after the hearing, we will schedule a work session sometime in July. I don't think we've been joined. I don't see the council president in. So from here, I do see we have been joined by Councilmember Henry, member of the committee. And with this, I want to hand it over to Councilmember Clark, the sponsor of the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee and members of agencies. And I wrote out my remarks this afternoon so I wouldn't make them too long. So I hope you'll forgive me for doing what I don't usually do, which is read them to you. As you know, on page 5 of the committee packet is the summary that I distributed by email to all members of the committee a few days ago. And but that's where they are if anyone needs to check it out. Through the COVID-19 pandemic, we often hear of the fragility of individuals of all ages with underlying conditions. Zero waste is about underlying conditions like asthma, caused in great part by incineration polluting our air. Today, we come to consider bans on poisonous chemicals infecting our lives through the very ground we walk on. There are 3. Glyphosate, I said it, a probable carcinogen better known as Roundup. Chlorpyrifos, a toxic to birds, fish, bees, and harmful to us humans, especially causing developmental delays and disorders to children, even as early as in utero. And yes, unbelievable, the governor has today vetoed, I heard, the state's chlorpyrifos ban legislation, leaving Baltimore City as the potential flagship for the comeback. Special thanks to our testifiers this evening and all the advocates who waged such an impressive battle only to lose what should have been a sure thing in protecting Maryland's bees, birds, and babies. We'll be there to help get that made right. And our third pesticide ban for public property only is neonicotinoid because harmful to bees and certain wildlife. Again, the summary is on page 5 of the committee notes. For me, challenging the underlying causes described began with Ms. Deborah Mason in Mayfield and has grown and spread in support from there. Thanks, Deborah and Mayfield and our other supportive neighborhoods and organizations from Blue Water, Baltimore to Mom's Grocery Store. This legislation does not ban sales, just use of these pesticides within Baltimore City. The Baltimore City Public Schools is preempted. For the past 13 years, that organization has been observing the indoor, outdoor, and grounds requirements of the Maryland Integrated Pest Management in Schools law. They are here in support of this city council legislation, but not affected by it. There are new mentors when we pass and approve this bill. Of the 10 city agencies asked for a report, 3 approved with no conditions. 2 approved with requested amendments, which have already been drafted and mutually agreed to. So that much work is accomplished. DPW defers to health. Health, finance, and DOT request the chance to work with city council and fellow agencies to see if some acceptable way can be found to meet their individual concerns. Recreation and Parks is willing to work as well with this group, and we'll all be back together, maybe not 100% together, but farther than we are today. And thanks to scheduling this hearing, so the reports are in, so I, as a co-sponsor and lead sponsor, have the ability to see what's bothering the agencies that are concerned. BGE, Baltimore Gas and Electric, by the way, has withdrawn its opposition to this legislation. BGE's Jay Bennett reports that BGE has now banned glyphosate itself. So no more problems with this bill. As first among the 10 co-sponsors of this legislation, I am enmeshed as well as we all are in the health, economic, food, unemployment, and emotional tolls of this pandemic. I'm also more than aware of city governments and the health department's overwhelming demands in leading us all through so many daily challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic. With such in mind, when we have worked together to arrive at a successful work session, I'm prepared to offer an amendment to extend the effective date of this legislation to fiscal year 2022, beginning July 1, 2021. When still recovering, the city and its agencies will be in a better position to undertake this crucial initiative. Thank you for your attention and consideration, and I'll be glad to try to answer any questions the committee might have.
Thank you, Councilmember Clark. Before we move on, I want to acknowledge that we've been joined by Councilmember Reisinger, member of the committee. Thank you for joining us.
Hey.
All right. So what I'd like to do now is move over to our agency reports. The committee received agency reports from several city agencies. So in the interest of time, because we do have the reports on file and we know that there will be a future work session to hash out any disagreements, what I'd like to do is I'll announce the agency, and if there's and I think we do have pretty good representation on this call from the agencies. If you have additional comments, please provide them. If you don't and you just want to stick by your report, just let us know that as well. And we will start with the Department of Transportation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Department of Transportation stands by its bill report.
Thank you. Department of Public Works.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Marcia Collins, representing the Department of Public Works. We sent some background information on each of these chemicals. We pointed out that we don't utilize any, but we did list some of the chemicals we use for rat abatement and so on. Since it does not directly impact us and our operations, we did defer to the Department of Health on this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Environmental Control Board.
By our report.
Office of Sustainability.
Hi, Lisa McNeely with the Office of Sustainability. We stand by our report. Thank you.
Department of General Services.
Good afternoon. This is Chichi Nyaganash, and we too stand by our response, our report.
Department of Finance.
Hi, this is Mark with the Department of Finance. We stand by our report, but I would just like to reiterate that we are very much looking forward to working on thinking about how we can implement this through the work sessions. The city is facing very tough financial times right now. The health department is strained under the COVID-19 pandemic. So we want to be sure that that is a part of the conversation to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Law Department.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is Hillary Ruley on behalf of the Law Department. We stand by our report. We have no other comments than what's in the report.
Thank you. Health Department.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Paul Nibber on behalf of the Baltimore City Health Department. While we stand by our opposition testimony, we would like to thank the bill sponsor, Councilman Clark, for including us in many discussions around this bill. And like other agencies here in the city, we look forward to having that conversation around this bill and working towards it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Department of Recreation and Parks.
This is Bill Vondersek from the Department of Recreation and Parks, and we stand by our report. We do have a short little 10-slide slideshow that we'd like to share with the folks, just to make visual some of the points we made in our report, if that would be all right.
Yes. Did you send this to Marguerite already? Do you have this, Marguerite, to get the screen share?
Yes, I've worked with Marguerite to share my screen.
He'll be able to share his screen.
Can you see it?
Yep, we got you. Thank you.
Okay. So, let's see, next slide. What I wanted to do was visually show you the exceptions to the bill that we're requesting for the horticulture division. And then Ashley Bowers, our environmental policy analyst, is going to show a little bit about how they use glyphosate to control invasive species in our natural areas and why we were requesting exceptions to the bill for these two areas. Folks are probably familiar with the Rawlings Conservatory. Oh. This is one area that we wanted an exception to be able to use neonicotinoids. The palms are very big in the palm house, and in order to get at the pests that live up in the tops, in the old days, we would have to spray pesticide from the floor up to the top of the palm plants. And with neonicotinoids, you can sprinkle a little granular on the surface, water it in, and it's a systemic pesticide that gets up to the top of the palms, and it makes it a lot safer for the applicator as well as the public. These are the greenhouses at Cylburn Arboretum. This is another place where we were asking for an exception for neonicotinoids. This is where we grow all our poinsettias for our display at the conservatory that show up down at City Hall, that are sold as a revenue generator. And these two used to be sprayed. And as part of an integrated pesticide management program, we can now use granular neonicotinoids and sprinkle, like a quarter of a teaspoon in every pot and water it in. And then it's taken up by the plant systemically. So it's a lot safer for the applicator. And it's one of many ways that we control pests in the greenhouses up at Cylburn. So safe that even cats can live up there. And Ashley Bowers, our environmental policy analyst, is going to talk a little bit about the controlling invasive vegetation management in our natural areas. So if you just want to say next slide, Ashley.
Okay, thanks, Bill. Hi, everyone. So I just want to touch base and connect with everyone to ensure that folks are aware of the current practices in the Forestry Division for mitigating invasive vegetation in our natural areas of city parks. So we have a robust program that has really taken off in the last year and a half, and we are supplied with a contractor, a professional land management contractor who is helping us to treat non-native invasive plant infestations. And we also have our Weed Warriors program. Our Weed Warriors are not permitted to use herbicide on park land, but our professional contractor uses it as an essential tool for the practice of integrated vegetation management. And I'm going to abbreviate that with IVM, integrated vegetation management. So it's an integrated practice because we use a diversity of tools in order to treat problematic vegetation. And that includes mechanical equipment, chemicals like herbicides. Glyphosate is a tool that we currently use, but only on occasion. And it's an important tool to intermix with other herbicide and chemical compounds for various purposes. And we also use things like cultural controls, like planting trees to shade out invasive plants that require sunlight. So that's why it's called integrated. So this image is a visual for Patterson Park, the boat lake. So you can see in the area on the left-hand side, underneath the yellow polygon here, you can see the infestation of a invasive plant called Phragmites, or a common reed. And it's an incredibly aggressive grass that can grow up to 20 feet tall or more, honestly. And it spreads rapidly. So you can see the area underneath the yellow polygon where the Phragmites had grown up to in 2014, and the area outside of that, which the yellow highlights, is how far the infestation had spread by 2019. So in 5 years, this is the level of infestation and the rapid pace at which it's spreading. Now, I just wanted to point this out as an example because Phragmites is really untreatable without the use of herbicide. And there have been hundreds of studies conducted on this plant because it's incredibly aggressive and causing economic damage across the country. So glyphosate is an essential tool for plant like this, as well as a handful of other species that we have in Baltimore City. So Bill, you can go to the next slide. So glyphosate, while I certainly am on board with limiting our amount of chemical use, I just know that it is an essential tool for certain practices in managing our natural areas and ensuring that we have a healthy environment in Baltimore City. So I recognize that some of these issues offset one another, where we have health concerns with the use of some of these chemicals, but we also have health concerns without healthy ecosystems. And so that is the purpose of the program that I'm running in the forestry division. So here we've got invasive mulberry growing over the sidewalk at Sisson and 29th Street. And we cut it down. Just 1 year later, it was fully regrown and blocking the sidewalk because we didn't use herbicide. Bill, you can go to the next slide. And so a year and a half later, we came back and treated that same mulberry tree with glyphosate. And, you know, we know how these chemicals work. Obviously, this plant didn't grow back, and so we had great success with this single treatment, where otherwise we would have had to be treating that same mulberry tree repetitively year after year. And I point this out as an example because this was a treatment that was just done on a whim with my colleague. We had some extra time, and so we stopped and pulled off and treated this plant. We had glyphosate on hand. Glyphosate's not the only chemical that you can use for this type of scenario, but you know, it's situations like that where that was the tool we had in our toolbox at that time. And so we jumped out and treated it to prevent some traffic hazards and to open access for that sidewalk. So there are scenarios when I truly find there to be benefit for the use of glyphosate when it's used minimally and appropriately. Okay, next slide. So I mentioned when it's used appropriately, selective treatments and in low volume amounts are the only way that we are using it in our program. So you can go to the next slide, please. And just to kind of paint a picture of that, you know, we're using a squirt bottle or, you know, a paintbrush like this or a backpack sprayer. So the amount of herbicide that is being used to manage our natural areas are low volume. They're treating only the specific plant that's being targeted and not those around it. So I just think that's important to keep in mind as we're having this conversation, that there are appropriate uses for these tools and there are certainly uses in excess that are what we are most concerned about when we have human health hazards and issues with environmental pollution. And the next slide, please. This is the last slide. Oh, sorry, there's two more. This was just an example of a photograph that Bill Vondersek took up in Loch Raven Reservoir. So this is an example of a grass that really cannot be treated with other chemical compounds other than glyphosate that we're aware of at this time, at least. And this is an invasive plant called Japanese stiltgrass, and it spreads rapidly. You can see it's really consumed the entire understory of this portion of the trail that Bill was walking on. So, you know, we wouldn't treat an area like this because it's too far gone, but the idea here is that we want to prevent this type of infestation in our parks that are local in the city. And we can only do that with, you know, treating small patches and smaller infestations before they really get established to this point in time. So again, using all of our tools are really essential. And then the last slide, please. So this is just a map of Gwynns Falls Lake and Park. It represents about 50% of the natural areas that we have in our purview within recreation and parks. So you can see about a third of the entirety of Gwynns Falls Lake and Park has a severely invaded understory. And so again, I just point out that the more tools that we have, the more capable we will be to mitigate some of these concerns, to really protect our natural areas and ensure that they are as invasive free as possible and thriving with healthy ecosystems. So that's all I have for our slideshow. Councilman Burnett, do you have, will there be time for additional questions or conversation as we go forward?
So absolutely, that's the idea of the work session.
Okay.
We just wanted everything to be tossed out from the agencies today, and then hearing public testimony. I think the council member Clark has a panel that'll follow the agencies, and then we'll go to the folks who called in and joined in other ways. But the idea is to work through the work session to add some, amendments and changes as needed. Thank you for that.
May I just make one comment?
Sure, Councilmember Clark.
Only that this is very helpful to have a list of what it is that Rec and Park wants and doesn't want. Now, I'm not saying I agree, but we're looking for what it is you're saying and why. So you got to be at these meetings, okay?
Okay.
All right. And of course, we take it for granted that Mr. Vondrasak will always be there. He is a big supporter of one of the things I would like to see gone. But we've always managed to be civil together. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I'm not a big supporter of pesticides, okay? I'm a beekeeper. I have 4 colonies of bees. 3 of them have swarmed in the last 5 days, and now I have 7 colonies of bees. I agree that neonicotinoids affect bee populations. I'm not a pesticide lover, but as I think Ashley very effectively pointed out, used responsibly and sparingly, they're a necessary tool in the toolkit with all the other things that we use. So I just want to clarify, I'm not a big supporter of pesticides.
I didn't say it that way, and I apologize if it came across that way. Respect for you, but you got the lady here on purpose who knows where and why they're using this thing I want to get rid of. I was asking her to be at the meeting, not only because and that was the best thing you did all day. And that's saying a lot. So I'm looking forward to working with you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Clark. We're going to go to Department of Housing and Community Development.
Hi, good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the Health Committee. This is Stephanie Murdoch, Legislative Liaison for the Baltimore City Department of Housing and Community Development. We stand by our report this evening, and we want to thank the Councilwoman for working with us to craft an amendment to preserve the procedures that are currently in the building fire and related codes related to rodenticide procedures. As many of you council members know, when a building is demolished or a site is substantially rehabilitated, we require that contractors seeking a permit to do so make sure that the area is inspected and free of rodents, and if necessary, treated. So thank you to the Councilwoman. We look forward to the work session and working with our brother and sister agencies on this legislation.
Thank you. And the last agency report we have should be from the Baltimore City Public Schools. I'm not sure.
I'm here. Can you hear me? I am Ingrid Brailsford, the Inspection and Environmental Compliance Assistant Director with Baltimore City Public Schools. And we are supported but not affected because we have state law that preempts and is more stringent.
Thank you. Before we move to the panel, I did want to give the committee any opportunity to ask any follow-up. I know we have a work session, which will be, but if there's anything top of mind that members of the committee may have about any of the reports before we move to the panel and public testimony.
No, sir.
All right. Hearing none, we will.
Mr. Chairman?
Councilmember Clark.
Yeah, I just like to clarify that my intent is that the work session have follows meetings to which all the everybody's invited, but certainly the agencies that I've articulated who really asked for that, to work things out. I'm just saying that when we get to the work session, I'm hoping that good, bad, or indifferent, the committee will be ready to vote at the end of that work session. I hope so. That's my goal in having these meetings in the meantime. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Hearing no more from the committee, we have a few names have been sent to us for testimony before we go to the general testimony. So we'll start with the Maryland Pesticide Education Network. We have a Ruth Berlin, Executive Director. Are you on the line, Ruth? Councilmember, I'm looking here, I'm not seeing Ruth, is there another representative from Maryland?
There are other representatives on that panel in case she's having trouble getting in.
Okay, we'll come back.
Excuse me,
All right,
Miss Raindrop is present. Miss Raindrop.
Well, okay, so let's go there. Bonnie Raindrop, Grassroots Coordinator of Smart on Pesticides Coalition. I think you're still muted, Bonnie. If you want to unmute yourself. We can see you, but we can't hear you.
Okay. Is actually on the phone, and she's on there on number 410-693-7319. Can you unmute her so she can give her testimony? Did you hear me?
Yeah, we heard you. Reading on Marguerite, I can't hear her.
Councilman, we're unable to do that with the call-ins. We can't identify them.
Oh.
Okay. So yeah, we don't get that kind of detail. What we can ask is if Ruth can email the committee the testimony, and we'll make sure it gets out and in the mail file. Or if Ruth can use the WebEx platform to dial in, we can come back if you want to go first, and we can work it that way to get some time.
If I may, since we can't get her, I have her testimony with me. I could give her testimony for her. Would that be okay? Okay, great. So Ruth Berlin is speaking on behalf as founder and executive director of the nonprofit organization Maryland Pesticide Education Network since 1994. The organization facilitates the Smart on Pesticides Coalition. The list of our 105 member organizations and businesses is attached to our testimony and includes 19 organizations and businesses based in Baltimore City. The coalition collaborates to protect Marylanders and the natural systems we depend upon from the adverse impacts of toxic pesticides. Our coalition of healthcare and public health associations, businesses, farmers, waterkeepers, and environmentalists support this bill because it protects people, pollinators, and our food supply, wildlife, and our bay from the known dangers related to exposure to chlorpyrifos, glyphosate, and neonicotinoids. Ever-growing peer-reviewed science underscores the serious long-term impacts of these chemicals. Addressing the use of these three chemicals is more critical now, given COVID-19, as exposure to them is linked to weakening of the immune system and adverse respiratory impacts, impacting our high-risk population who suffer from COPD, asthma, emphysema, and allergies. According to the Department of Health, 12.4% of Baltimore City adults currently have asthma, compared to 8.4% statewide. The city rates of children with asthma are twice the national average, 20% versus 9.4% respectively. Eliminating exposures as soon as possible will reduce exacerbation of COVID-19 symptoms for city residents. Our organization's healthcare facility project promotes safer pest management. We are currently alerting hospitals we partner with on replacing pesticide-registered disinfectants that exacerbate respiratory symptoms with safer products, and to be vigilant about pesticides used for pest management that can also exacerbate respiratory symptoms, which many COVID-19 patients experience. Our next panelist will focus on the specific science about these three pesticides. As you know, the 2020 Maryland General Assembly banned the use of chlorpyrifos due to its lifelong brain-harming impacts on children's health. However, the law won't be fully implemented until January 2022, allowing for too many potential births of babies on the autism and learning disability spectrum. Just an hour ago, we heard the governor vetoed the bill, which will require an override, so outcome on the state level is not guaranteed. Therefore, it behooves the city to ensure its children are protected from chlorpyrifos as soon as possible. In addition, the General Assembly banned consumer garden use of neonicotinoids as of 2018 to protect our pollinators, which also continue to die in record numbers, adding to our currently endangered food supply, already challenged by COVID-19's alarming impacts on Maryland's farm workers. Our city's pollinators are critical essential workers for our city's urban farms and residents growing their own food. Also of note, our pilot State House Organic Grounds project since 2014 proves safer alternatives work to replace glyphosate. Thank you.
Thank you. And Bonnie, do you want to jump right into yours?
I think Dr. Payne Sturgis is to go next.
Sure. Okay.
Thank you.
So we have Dr. Payne Sturgis, Assistant Professor at Maryland Institute for Applied Environmental Health.
Yes. Hi. Good afternoon. Again, my name is Devin Payne Sturgis. I assume you guys can hear me. Yes. My areas of expertise are children's environmental health risk assessment and environmental health policy. Prior to joining the faculty at UMD, I worked for the US EPA, where I managed the children's environmental health research portfolio, which included studies on prenatal exposures to chlorpyrifos. These studies were started in 1998 and were jointly funded by EPA and the NIH. It is from these perspectives that I offer my testimony. EPA's Science Advisory Panel for Pesticides concluded that these health studies showed consistent associations relating chlorpyrifos exposures to abnormal reflexes in newborns, pervasive developmental disorders in young children, including attention and behavior problems. After nearly a decade reviewing the science and assessing risks, EPA concluded that chlorpyrifos harms children. In 2016, EPA carefully and thoughtfully followed the recommendations of its advisory panel and further improved the risk assessment for chlorpyrifos to account for prenatal exposures that result in adverse neurodevelopmental effects. EPA's risk assessment found that all uses of chlorpyrifos, be it on food, feed crops, seed coatings, and even on golf courses, result in unsafe levels of exposure from all routes of exposure: food, inhalation, drinking water, and skin contact. EPA's risk assessment found that children are exposed to chlorpyrifos on food alone at levels that are 140 times greater than what the agency believes to be safe. EPA scientists who are responsible for regulating pesticides concluded that chlorpyrifos did not meet the FQPA, the legal standard of reasonable certainty of no harm, and therefore proposed a ban, canceling all remaining food uses of chlorpyrifos, but the Trump administration blocked it, as you all know. But this doesn't mean that localities such as Baltimore City should not take action to protect the health of their residents, especially children. The scientific evidence supports the elimination of chlorpyrifos. I have also conducted research on neonicotinoid pesticides. In a research study I published last year about neonic residues in the U.S. food supply, I noted the persistence of neonics in the environment. They tend to stick around in the soil. They can lead to inadvertent and unavoidable contamination. Neonics are highly water soluble and can get into drinking water supplies, and they are not easily removed by our water treatment plants. Neonicotinoids are systemic pesticides, as was mentioned earlier, which actually means they cannot simply be washed off or removed by peeling before eating any treated fruit or vegetable. Taking all of this into consideration, along with the emerging information about the neurotoxic and endocrine effects of neonics on humans, limiting the use of these pesticides is warranted. And I'd like to conclude by saying that given the mounting evidence of the negative health effects of chlorpyrifos, the ecological and human health concerns about neonicotinoids, as well as glyphosate, I urge you all to support this Council Bill 200495. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Kate Bremen, Advocate, Environmental Maryland.
Thank you so much, Chairman Burnett and members of the Health Committee. My name is Kate Bremen, and I'm here on behalf of Environment Maryland and Maryland PIRG. We are two Baltimore-based, statewide, citizen-supported advocacy organizations working on behalf of a healthy environment and public interest advocacy. We applaud Councilmember Mary Pat Clark for introducing this legislation, and we thank committee members, Chairman Burnett, committee members Henry and Reisinger for co-sponsoring this legislation. Scientists, farmers, beekeepers, and advocates have sounded the alarm. It's time to ban these toxic chemicals. Baltimore families suffer greatly from increased exposure to air pollution and toxic chemicals from the trash incinerator, the toxic legacy of lead in our homes, and from chemicals on our lawns, in our food, and consumer products. This exposure burdens our health and health care costs for the city and for families. And we should do everything we can to reduce exposure to these harms. Glyphosate is the main chemical in Roundup. Roundup and generic versions of it are actually the most widely used herbicide in the US. 26 million pounds of Roundup are sprayed on public parks, playgrounds, schools, and gardens every year. You may think that if used properly, glyphosate is safe, or that people can just choose not to use products containing glyphosate if they're worried about the health impacts. But unfortunately, the widespread use of this chemical makes it largely impossible to avoid. Studies have found it in Cheerios, Quaker Oats, beer, and ice cream. And studies are finding more and more of this chemical is showing up more in our bodies. A 2015 study detected glyphosate in 93% of Americans tested. The widespread use should concern us all because of its demonstrated impact on human health. Unfortunately, but unsurprisingly, the federal government and the EPA have failed to protect Marylanders from glyphosate and other toxic chemicals. But in their absence, communities around the country are stepping up. Montgomery County banned the use of glyphosate along with all cosmetic lawn pesticides. 83 municipalities and states, from Boulder, Colorado, to Dubuque, Iowa, to South Portland, Maine, have restricted glyphosate, and Baltimore should join them. One key reason is that researchers are finding more evidence every day that exposure to glyphosate and similar chemicals contributes to respiratory symptoms and asthma. With asthma rates in our city well above the national average, we should do everything we can to protect the respiratory health of our families and children. We don't need these chemicals, and it's particularly dangerous to allow them for use on our lawns, parks, and playgrounds where children play. By supporting this bill, you can help protect the health of our planet, our people, our pollinators, and our wildlife. With many effective alternatives, there is no reason to continue exposing Baltimore families to this dangerous toxin. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate your attention to this critical issue.
All right, now we're going to go to Bonnie Raindrop, Grassroots Coordinator, Smart on Pesticides Coalition. We got to mute. We can't hear you. There you go.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. I'm Grassroots Coordinator for the Smart on Pesticides Coalition. My name is Bonnie Raindrop. I'm also Legislative Chair for Central Maryland Beekeepers, and we support this bill. I live in Lauraville and have been a beekeeper for 15 years. I use best practices, but I can't keep my bees alive, and I'm not alone. Beekeepers are losing 50% and more of honeybee hives in our state. It's unsustainable, and many beekeepers are giving up. The loss of one beehive is valued between $1,000 and $5,000 in lost income and replacement costs, and this doesn't include intensive labor hours by the beekeeper. Why does it matter that bees are dying? 1 in 3 bites of food takes a pollinator. In Maryland, $40 million worth of crops require pollination. Bees are a key species. and their mass dying is warning us something is wrong, and it's the pesticides. Neonicotinoids, or neonics, are a neurotoxic pesticide. Extensive peer-reviewed science has found they are a major contributor to honeybee and wild bee declines. Neonics adversely impact wildlife, aquatic life, and human health. Our written testimony documents the science on this harm. Pollinators are crucial to sustaining Baltimore's urban farms, gardens, and flora. The city's use of neonics in parks and city-owned land poisons these natural refuges for bees and wild pollinators. These poisons are systemic. Once they're sprayed on a plant or seed, they permeate every cell of the plant, pollen, nectar, and the fruits we eat. They are persistent in plants. A single application will cause a shrub or tree to express this poison with a killing dose every time it blooms, with a half-life of 7 years or more. Neonics were banned for consumer use in Maryland because they are too dangerous. But the law did not go far enough. This Baltimore City law will close the loophole by banning the use of neonics on city parks and by companies that apply them in lawn treatments. Neonics were originally touted by the pesticide industry as safe for humans, but independent science is linking them to cancer risk, reproductive harm, and endocrine disruption in people, and finding adverse impacts to the brain associated with learning and memory. And if you were wondering about bees and chlorpyrifos, it is second only to neonics as the most deadly pesticide for bees. Glyphosate also negatively impacts honeybees' sensory and cognitive abilities. Every year, new studies link these pesticides to increasing evidence of harm to people, wildlife, and our environment. There are plenty of safer alternatives for every pest need, and many are listed in our written testimony. It's time to get these poisons out of Baltimore, and I urge this committee to lead the City Council in protecting the health of Baltimore by passing a strong pesticide control and regulation bill. I also would like to add that Maryland Pesticide Education Network worked with the city in transforming the Canton Waterfront Park to an organic park, which was hailed by the city at the end of the three-year period as a success and as an improvement to the park's turf and safety after the completion of the project 3 years ago. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, that concludes the panel. So I'm going to read the instructions for public testimony. I would like to note that we did receive a tremendous amount of written testimony already, so thank you to everyone who did that. It has been put into the bill file. So if folks have provided written testimony, we do ask that maybe provide a summary, because there may be a good number of people here who would like to speak, and just for the sake of time, if you've already sent something written, then just give us a shorter version. If you like to read the whole thing, certainly welcome that as well. I will start, and I'm going to need some help from Marguerite. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with the WebEx users who have logged on to the web-based version of this hearing. What we will ask is that there's a little button that allows you to raise your hand, and Marguerite will be able to see that you raise your hand and that you would like to speak. So with that, if anyone that's logged in on WebEx, click the hand raise button. And I don't know if I'm giving the instructions right, Marguerite, but that's what I have in front of me. So, we'll go from there. I'll let her take it over.
Hi. Emily Scar.
Hi, this is Emily Scar, the Director of Maryland PERG. You have my written testimony and you heard from Kate. I just wanted to say thank you to the committee for considering this legislation, to Councilmember Clark for her leadership on this issue. I know personally I've been out walking my neighborhood a lot every day with my 2 children under 3 and my dog, and I've been pretty distressed to see the amount of people getting their lawns treated during a public health crisis, and I look forward to a day when I can do so in Baltimore without seeing those toxic signs on our public parks and our neighborhoods. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Emily.
Mr. Fedden?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, great. Hi, my name's Jay Feldman. I'm Executive Director of Beyond Pesticides. We're based in Washington, D.C., have membership throughout the state of Maryland and in Baltimore. And we are an environmental public health organization. We did submit a written statement, which I will not read, but want to support the legislation in front of you, principally because of the impact on children. Pesticides, as you know, are particularly problematic for children who are at elevated risk. They are especially vulnerable. There's data cited in our statement from the American Pediatric Association, and clearly because children take in more air relative to body weight and absorb more chemical relative to body weight than adults, are at elevated risk factors. There is, as you've heard, a long list of studies that focus on the adverse effects associated with the 3 chemicals that have been called out in the legislation. However, the legislation, I think, is critical in advancing a more holistic approach to addressing pest problems by identifying acceptable materials that are compatible with the environment and ecological systems. One of the tools that we use across the country with municipalities is the adoption of organic land management practices. So when you hear an expert tell you that land cannot be managed without pesticides, I can assure you that is not our experience. And in fact, we were told the very same thing when the organic food production movement started. Way back in the 70s and became labeled in the grocery stores. You've seen that label USDA organic, $50 billion industry using the same methodology that municipalities are using to build soil health, soil biology, cycle nutrients, sequester carbon, retain moisture, adopt supplemental material substances that are compatible with the ecological system and the soil biology, which make for more resilient plants, less water use, and lower cost in the long term because we're cycling nutrients naturally. So it's a win-win across the board. It overlaps with other concerns about asthma, as has been mentioned this evening. Also overlaps with the climate issue, and many communities are tying these programs that are captured by this legislation into their climate action plan because of the clear benefit of carbon sequestration when you build that soil health and you use the photosynthesis to bring carbon out of the environment and into the soil and capture it. We also recommend that you amend the legislation by banning, at least on city property owned and leased, synthetic fertilizers, because the system I'm talking about, similar to organic agriculture, does not allow for synthetic fertilizers, which benefits the bay, but also benefits the soil biology. With that, I will again point you to our full statement. Again, really appreciate your consideration of this legislation. Maryland, in many ways, has been on the cutting edge, originally with school IPM, and now hopefully moving into municipalities. And we have seen this in Montgomery County and in other areas of the state. So we hope and we pledge to work with the city, with policymakers and practitioners, land managers, to bring all the resources we have to assist in that transition that would be affected by this legislation. Thank you all.
Jennifer Kuntz.
Hi, thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great, thanks. Hey, everybody, this is Jennifer Kuntz, Maryland Program Manager with Clean Water Action. We strongly support this legislation. I submitted written testimony earlier this afternoon, which I won't reiterate, But I'll just say that when I'm at community association meetings and other events across the city talking about various environmental issues, this is one that people bring up of their own volition, surprisingly frequently, really. Pesticide use in the city, especially in our parks and near those places that children play, is an issue that residents of the city are very, very concerned about, and I know that because they bring it up with me, even when I don't bring it up myself. So I know that this is a measure that a vast majority of city residents will support to protect our public health and protect the pollinating insects that we need to develop our local food system so that the plants that local urban farmers and community gardeners are growing, especially in these food insecure times, are as productive as possible. And I'll also add that it was profoundly disappointing to see the news from the state level just this afternoon that Governor Hogan has vetoed the ban on chlorpyrifos. That's very disappointing to see that lack of consideration from public health from the governor's office. And this is really an opportunity for Baltimore City to lead the rest of the state and show a good example of what good public health policies can be by passing this bill. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lean Tan.
Oh. Hi. Oh, actually, we have someone for Sierra Club that will go before me. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to raise my hand right now.
Lisa Randolph.
Yes, hi. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
You can hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yep, we got you.
Okay, super. I'm sorry. Good afternoon, Chairman Burnett, Vice Chairman Henry, members of the Baltimore City Council Health Committee. My name is Lisa Radov, and I'm President and Chairman of Maryland Votes for Animals. We represent thousands of Marylanders across the state, many of whom reside in Baltimore City. We work on passing legislation that promotes humane treatment of animals, the environment, and people. I've sent the committee my written testimony. I'm here in support of Council Bill 20-0495. You've heard a lot of excellent scientific testimony, so I won't go back through that. I wanted to address, while we do have wildlife and bees in Baltimore, we also need to take a look at the link between these pesticides, our pets, and the residents of Baltimore City. Maryland Votes for Animals worked on the statewide bills to ban chlorpyrifos and restrict the use of neonicotinoids to protect wildlife, bees, and other pollinators. With the passage of the Pollinator Protection Act, neonicotinoids are strictly limited for outdoor application, as was said, and they're also banned are neonicotinoid-containing flea and tick repellents for pets, lice, bedbug treatments, as well as other indoor insecticides, including ant baits. This speaks to the indoor dangers of these pesticides. Many of these anti-tick treatments for pets include chlorpyrifos and neonics. Since people come into close contacts with their pets, human exposure to these active ingredients is inevitable as people play, cuddle, and even sleep with their pets. Glyphosate is still widely used as an herbicide in residential gardens, as you heard, and commercial properties. Roundup, the most popular pesticide that contains glyphosate, says on its label that it's safe once it dries, but that is more likely to keep it from being tracked onto carpets than really for the safety of the pets or the people. Pets who ingest glyphosate may have issues that range from developmental effects, cataracts, and acute stomach problems. Most of us walk our dogs twice a day. That means that we bring pesticide from the outdoor environment into our homes, exposing our families to pesticides that pets and we pick up when we walk, or even in just close proximity to pesticide-treated lawns, neighborhood playgrounds, parks, or golf courses. Pets and people are at risk so long as these chemicals are used in Baltimore City. I have more details about the effects of pets and people and walking in pesticide-infested areas in my written testimony. At this point, I'm just going to close by saying it's time to stop poisoning our environment with toxic chemicals that end up doing more harm than good. Councilwoman Clark, thank you for sponsoring this bill. I urge this committee to stand up for pets and people in Baltimore City and pass Pesticide Control and Regulation Council bill. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And just want to send a reminder for everyone. It looks like everyone is muted now, but just make sure that you're muting so that we can hear everyone clearly online. I'll hand it back over to Marguerite for other people who've raised their hand.
Tyler Smith.
Hello?
We can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to testify. As mentioned, my name is Tyler Smith. I'm a Baltimore City resident and an environmental health scientist appearing today on behalf of Earth Justice, which is the largest nonprofit environmental law organization in the country with over 20,000 activists here in Maryland. We strongly support banning the pesticide chlorpyrifos. In 2015, as you've heard, EPA concluded that chlorpyrifos does not meet the federal safety standard and proposed a ban. Yet despite these conclusions, in 2017, the Trump administration abandoned the proposal. They didn't present any new scientific evidence. They simply disregarded the science, and they left millions of people exposed. I believe Dr. Payne Sturgis summarized all of that very well. I want to make a few additional points. First is that state and local governments have responded to federal inaction by trying to protect the children in their jurisdictions. California, New York, and Hawaii already have banned chlorpyrifos. The Maryland legislature tried to do so this year. Unfortunately, as you've heard, Governor Hogan did veto that bill today. But Baltimore City would not be alone in taking action to ban chlorpyrifos if it were to pass this bill. Second, and I think there's often some confusion about this, the use of chlorpyrifos is not limited to rural areas. While it is used on dozens of crops, it also may be used on golf courses and other urban sites as well. And EPA scientists did find that exposures to chlorpyrifos on golf courses are hundreds of times what the agency scientists believe is safe. And so that's what I would add on chlorpyrifos. I do want to make an additional comment on the provisions of the bill as they relate to neonicotinoids. We do support ending the use of neonicotinoids on city property to protect pollinators. However, we suggest that the list of pesticides covered by this provision be revised to include an additional pesticide, sulfoxaflor, which acts in the same way as neonicotinoids and therefore has the same toxicity to pollinators. And I would be happy to provide additional information on this issue to members or staff. But ultimately, this bill would make the city a safer place to live. In particular, it would protect children from exposure to chlorpyrifos, and I urge your support. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, we're ready for the call-in instructions to receive testimony.
Okay. Thank you all for those who have joined via WebEx. We are now going through all of the users who have called into the hearing. When it's a caller's turn to give testimony, they will hear 2 beeps on their phone and they can speak. If a caller does not want to provide testimony, they simply need to say that they don't want to provide testimony after they hear the 2 beeps on the line. I'll hand it back over to Marguerite.
Can you hear me? Oh, you can hear me. Okay. I am Natalie Benin-Casapel. I am for this bill banning pesticides. If we just stop and think, years ago, our grandparents did not use all the pesticides that are being used today. The amount of chemicals in the air, the amount of cancer, the amount of sickness, the amount of autism, the amount of everything is hurting wildlife and people. I have walked out my door just a few feet within the last week, and 3 neighbors are using Roundup. Literally, I saw them holding the bottle. A neighbor across the street for his commercial office building, a neighbor on 4th Street, and my home neighbor in my condominium building, just to get rid of what he thinks is algae or I think moss, and I tried to give them alternatives. I'd like to understand why it's allowed to be sold on end caps at Home Depot and all the hardware stores, and no alternative is sitting next to that. These are educated, intelligent people, young people, old people, all of us who hear this on the news every single day about the dangers of it. That's what I'm also fighting for. Mother's Day is coming up. How many people are going to be buying flowers at the garden centers? We all know the dangers of all of the chemicals. Yet there's not proper labeling and there's no alternatives given. So please, even amongst ourselves, our next door neighbor uses Roundup pretty much. We see it happening every day. So I am for this bill, absolutely. Thank you.
To the next caller, do you have anything you wanted to say to the committee?
Yes, is this me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, my name is William Castro. I'm a resident here in Baltimore City. I am a beekeeper. I also am one of the founders of the Baltimore Beekeepers Group. I'd just like to remind folks that our failure rate on honeybees in the state of Maryland, according to the Bee Informed Partnership, is somewhere between 55 and 65%. This is highly related to pesticide exposure. We believe we represent in the hundreds of kept managed bee colonies here in the city, and we need all the help that we can get. We love our city, and we support this bill very much, and hope that the council pushes us forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next caller. Hello?
Hello?
Please go ahead. Go ahead, please.
Hello, my name is Richard Oakes. I live in Baltimore City. I am also a beekeeper with no bees because our bees all died. And not only that, stressing on the bees, we have almost an epidemic of lung issues among the youth in Baltimore City. 5,000 kids have asthma. With the incinerator putting other stuff in the air. Now these chemicals on top of all of that. And with the COVID pandemic, people who are already at risk from other lung weakness puts them in a risk for getting the COVID. We need to ban these chemicals in Baltimore. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next caller. Next caller.
Hi, my name is Steve McDaniel. Am I next? I heard the two beeps.
We can hear you. Go for it, Steve.
Okay. Okay, I'm a master beekeeper. I had bees in Baltimore for over 30 years until one year they all died. That was 2012. The next year I restocked and they all died again. These colonies had all the hallmarks of a pesticide kill. After 4 years of restocking and having all my bees die, I finally gave up. And I'm a pretty stubborn person, so it takes a lot to make me give up. I'm still in beekeeping, but I don't take bees into Baltimore because the environment is just too toxic. I certainly can't blame farms for that because my bees were in downtown Baltimore, a stone's throw from City Hall, and there were no farms for 10 miles. So it had to be other pesticide use, mostly on flowers. I assume neonics, but chlorpyrifos could possibly also have been involved there too. I would also suggest that you add a fungicide, which is a type of neonicotinoid called chlorothalonil, which has been shown to affect the bee's immune system and make them more likely to die from infections. So if you would add chlorothalonil to your list, that would be a good thing. Otherwise, I mean, the bill looks great and I fully support it. And I hope that the Baltimore environment will be healthier, both for people and for bees in the future. Thank you.
And the last caller.
Hi, this is Dr. Michael Ikniowski. I'm a pediatrician and chairperson of the Environmental Health Committee for the Maryland chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here today about some of the health effects of these chemicals on children. I did submit a fairly detailed written report, so I'll just summarize what's included in that. Children, because of their small size and ongoing growth and development, are at greater risk of toxicity from any chemical exposure. A smaller amount of a given toxic chemical will cause harm to a child well before a fully grown adult would be affected by it. A fetus whose brain and other organs are just beginning to form can receive an enormous dose relative to its size when the pregnant mother is exposed. And infants and toddlers who spend much of their time playing and exploring at ground level, combined with their tendency to put almost anything in their mouth, increases their potential for ingestion of toxic substances that are in their environment. This can even include house dust contaminated by pesticides that have drifted well beyond the location where they were applied. Chlorpyrifos has been found to be one such chemical with toxic effects that have been found at levels far lower than those that would cause an acute poisoning. In recent studies, children exposed to chlorpyrifos were found to have lower IQs, have a higher rate of attention problems and ADHD symptoms, and a greater risk of autism spectrum disorders. One study in California found threefold risk of autistic disorders born to women, for children born to women living up to 1.5 kilometers from where the chlorpyrifos was sprayed aerially. Another study published just last year found a 27% increase in autism spectrum disorders related to chlorpyrifos up to 2 kilometers from where they were applied. The prevalence of disorders, autistic disorders, is rising each year, and this is an increase that I witnessed firsthand during 40 years in pediatric practice. Autism, ADHD, and developmental disabilities all have lasting impact on children, their families, and the quality of their lives. And the families bear the cost of increased medical services, and their schools need to deliver increased educational services. Recent studies have also found associations between chlorpyrifos and asthma, also at levels below those that cause acute poisoning. Exposures during pregnancy and in the first year of life to chlorpyrifos were linked to increased respiratory symptoms at ages 5 and 7 in children. Additional studies concluded that there was a strong association between organophosphate, which is the class of pesticide that includes chlorpyrifos. There was an increased risk of asthma and asthma exacerbations, and with Baltimore's high prevalence of asthma, any additional exposure to a chemical like this would increase the risk of worsening of asthma for the many citizens of Baltimore who suffer from that. For glyphosate and the neonicotinoids, I have smaller amounts of information. Both can cause acute poisonings. With glyphosate, they can either be accidentally or intentionally ingested and cause a range of symptoms that includes throat pain, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, respiratory failure, hypertension, and irregular heart rhythms. In neonicotinoids, similarly, poisonings from one called imidacloprid, which is one of the more commonly used ones, can cause confusion, agitation, dizziness, headaches, drowsiness, weakness, tremor, and even loss of consciousness. There's also been a link between glyphosate and asthma. Children exposed to herbicides were found to have a higher risk of asthma, fourfold risk of asthma after exposure to glyphosate. I couldn't find any specific studies on glyphosate specifically in childhood cancers, but an increased risk of leukemia was found in association with herbicides, which glyphosate is the most commonly used one of. In summary, children are uniquely vulnerable to adverse effects from toxic chemicals, even at very low levels of exposure. It's important to protect them from accidental ingestion or inhalation of pesticides and herbicides capable of causing them harm. Each of the chemicals included in this proposed bill can adversely affect the health and well-being of children, and they deserve our best efforts to protect them from preventable harm. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was the last caller, Mr. Chair.
Okay. So again, I would like to thank everyone for joining us this evening. We will, as we mentioned at the beginning of the hearing, for those that may have jumped in late, due to some staffing issues at the agency level and the focus on COVID-19, there's been a request from the bill sponsor and advocates and agencies to continue to work in tailoring this bill to make sure we have the best version possible. And we'll work with the bill sponsor to announce a follow-up work session, which will likely be on this platform at that point, to hash out amendments and everything else that needs to move forward. But we're not going to do any voting today. We will recess the hearing until the work session is scheduled, and we'll make a big public announcement about that. So you can save the date as soon as we can work it out. And between now and the work session scheduled, the committee and agency representatives will have an opportunity to review all of the testimony, all of the amendments that have come in, work on some potential changes, and move this bill forward. I think this is something that we definitely need in Baltimore City, and can have an opportunity to be a leader for the region in protecting not only our citizens but our environment. With that, I want to thank everyone for attending. We are going to recess until we announce the next work session. Thank you all. Have a good and safe evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Burnett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Stay safe.